Hi, it's Tom here from Running Physio. Today I want to talk to you about return to running, which is often really important for athletes and of course runners we see in clinic, and how to overcome some of the common barriers that can stop people getting back to the sport they love. I talked a little bit earlier this week about common scenarios that you might see with runners in clinic, and got lots of questions off the back of that. So I thought I'd talk about some of these barriers people were asking about, hopefully give you some really useful stuff that you can use in clinic. So first up, first question that we got as a common question around return to running was, what do you do if their pain is delayed? So classic situation is often a runner with tendinopathy. They might not find they actually get pain during the run, or actually maybe it's there at the start and it warms up and feels better, but it reacts afterwards, often the next day, with a lot of early morning stiffness and discomfort. And I'm sure you will have seen that with patients you see in clinic. Now, if they're not getting those symptoms during the running itself, they're not really getting a bit of a warning that they're doing too much. And so people, when they're doing the return to running process, they find it really hard to gauge what is too much for them. When do they need to actually stop? So with this delayed response, with tendinopathy particularly where we see it, what I would suggest that we do is, first of all, discuss it with the runner and see, have they had a run recently where they didn't get that next day response? Can they identify a distance or time they've done where actually it felt okay the next day? It wasn't stiff in the morning, they weren't getting any response from their symptoms. If they can, that becomes a starting point. Maybe they say, I can do sort of 20-25 minutes and it's okay the next day. We use that as a launch point. Now, sometimes they won't actually be able to identify that level, particularly if they've been doing too much for a while. They won't necessarily really know how much is manageable. So then we need to test it. And the best way to do it is in a fairly logical scientific approach. So rather than be guided by pain, be guided by time or distance. So we might say, okay, let's test it. Go and do a 10-minute run at an easy pace and let's see how it responds the next day. If we don't get that next day response in terms of symptoms, we then know, okay, this is a manageable level, let's do a little bit more. So if you get that delayed response, we have to test it, we have to stop them. Even if they're totally pain-free, we say, okay, let's test what's likely to be manageable, see what the response is the next day, and build from there. And that often works really well with runners, but just requires a little bit of trial and error. So that's the first barrier, delayed pain response. We need to test them out a little bit more, essentially to find what's manageable when we're not getting pain during the activity itself. Second question I had, and this is a common one that I think a lot of us encounter with runners, is someone has a race coming up soon, but they're injured. Now, I've had this lots of times. I'm sure you will have had it lots of times in clinic. A runner comes in, the classic scenario is they've got a big race that's really important to them. Maybe it's overseas, they've paid for flights, they've paid for hotels, and they're telling you right at the start of that session, I am doing this race no matter what. I'm going to do it. Even if I've got to crawl across the finish line, I'm going to do it. So you've then got a limited time period to get them race ready. And this is a challenge for us. Now, you may know we've got Running Repairs online open at the moment. As part of the bonus bundle that's available today, we have race plans which are designed to prepare people for 5K, 10K, half marathon and marathon. So of course you can use those if you enroll and get that bundle. What I would often do if someone has a race coming up is just use the time you've got available. Have that discussion with them. Say, look, if we're rushing to get you ready for a race and you're seeing me because you've got pain, there's a chance it's going to be uncomfortable and flare it up. So they kind of know what the risks and concerns are involved. But quite often it just literally comes down to saying, how long have we got before this event? How many weeks? How much do we need to increase your distance by in that time, and spread it across the time? You know, simple stuff. If you've got 10 weeks to get ready for a 10K event, you're probably going to look at adding a K per week and utilizing the time that you've got available. Things like your 10% rule and gradual builds are probably not going to get someone race ready in that situation. So if they're happy to take a bit more of a risk, we probably are going to need to use the time and build towards it. The other option, If you feel perhaps they're going to be too irritable for that, and actually that's just going to mean they're on the start line with very irritated symptoms, which is not good, is sometimes a runner will choose actually just to cross train and keep the running fairly minimal in the lead up to an event, so that they're fit for it and they get through the event on the day. We've had people who actually sometimes have done things like an Ironman without running for 4 to 6 weeks beforehand, and just done the cycling and swimming because they knew they'd have the fitness to get through it on the day from all of their cross training and their cycling and swimming training. So they just decided, right, I'm just going to stay fit, I'm going to let this issue calm down and get through the event on the day. So you've got a couple of options. You either use the time and build up so that they're race ready if you think they can tolerate that, or you maybe focus a bit more on cross training, you keep the running at a very manageable level. But it's a decision you'll make together with the patient, of course. I'm very much a fan of working with them rather than sort of telling them what they want to do. Next on the list, again, common problem with return to running is, what if they keep having flare-ups? Every time we try to get them to increase their distance or their speed or any other part of their running, something hurts and they've got to stop. So this again is a common barrier to return to running. In this bonus bundle we've got available for you today, we've got some great patient handouts which help with this, because it gives them guidance in terms of pain, training, progression and recovery. So it's really helpful if the patient knows how to approach it. So I tend to give my patients those handouts so they've got a good idea of how to approach the return to running process. But there's a few things to think about here. It really massively depends on the patient. So I see quite a lot of patients that are coming back after quite complex injuries. They've had long periods of time away from running. They may have actually seen quite a few people before me. Certainly in those cases, when we don't have that tolerance, they've not had a lot of time out there building that tolerance, they've been away from it, I will go slow and I will really focus on consistency and really just try and be patient and gradually build their running tolerance. I have a nice plan. I tend to work with patients that have been irritable and have really struggled with the return to running process before. It's one of the return to running plans that's in our bonus bundle if you enroll today, which builds them really gradually, including walk breaks, up to 10 minutes of continuous running over a period of a few weeks, just to really get that tolerance so you can then build on from there. Quite often, if you can get even just to that small amount, then you can start to build. Really difficult if they can't tolerate more than a few minutes with their running. So I think if they keep having flare-ups, go slower, aim for consistency, plan recovery in it as much as you can. And sometimes it might be actually that if you really can't get them to cope with more than literally a couple of minutes of running, that they're still too irritable. And we need to calm things down first. So they may need a period of time away from running, a bit more time with rehab to gain the strength, control and flexibility before trying again. Now, often a missing piece of the puzzle with this is impact tolerance. That's what separates running from so many other activities, is the impact. Now, strength work, improving, balance and control, flexibility, brilliant, all valuable. But in order to run, you do need to be able to cope with impact. So if you're finding as soon as you bring running in, it just stirs things up. Maybe, they've got some issues with their knee or their calf or, some shin pain or what have you, and it just flares everything up again. Build on that impact tolerance first. Now, this can be super simple stuff. I'm a big fan of keeping it simple for patients with this. Things like jogging on the spot, skipping potentially, a low-level, comfortable plyometric work that they can cope with. And with this, I'm usually basing it on time rather than reps and sets. Now, my reasoning process here is my first test run for a patient that hasn't run for a long time is often about 3 minutes, sometimes separated out with walk breaks, maybe a 30-second walk break each minute. So what I want to do in the rehab is build that impact time, that impact tolerance up to roughly 3 minutes. So we might start them with jogging on the spot. Maybe they can only do 30 seconds initially. We gradually ramp that time up until they're managing about 3 minutes, and then we move on to the test run. So including a little bit of impact work a couple of times a week, starting at a low level, gradually ramping up the time, can be another way of getting people ready for this return to running process. Now, another thing we've got to help you with this in our return to running bonus package, if you enroll on Running Repairs Online today, is a decision tree. Because it's complicated, you can appreciate deciding when someone's ready to run, when should we focus on rehab, what are the tests we need to do. So we've laid it all out nice and clearly for you in a decision tree that will help you, as well as a detailed return to running guide in that bonus package if you enroll today. But that offer is closing this afternoon. That return to running guide has got 4 simple steps you can follow for successful return to running, and some real case studies that you can work through as well. So if they keep having flare-ups, we're going to go slower. We're going to focus on consistency. We're going to include some impact tolerance work as part of their rehab prior to return to running. Next question that we got sent through was, what about secondary injuries? Now, you might be not familiar with that term. Secondary injuries often occur if someone's had a long break from sport and then they come back into the sport and their body's not used to it and something else starts to hurt. So you might have someone who's seeing you for a bit of patellofemoral pain perhaps, and they're coming back into the sport and their knee's fine. It's not causing them any issues, but they're complaining that their calf is tight. Or their Achilles is a bit sore. So they're developing a secondary injury, something different from what they had originally. Now, the problem we find here is if we're not careful, the return to running process becomes very start-stop. You build, something else hurts, you stop. You build, something new hurts, you stop. Very frustrating for the runner, and it doesn't really get them back. Now, what we want instead really is that consistency, because it builds a tolerance in the tissues to cope with running. Really, the only way you can do that is with running. Nothing prepares you to run like running itself. So what I would suggest is if they're developing secondary injuries, obviously assess them. Yeah, treat them like a new injury, ensure it's safe for them to continue to run. If it's a sign of a bone stress injury or stress fracture, obviously we need to treat that appropriately. So that may well need a break from running. But wherever it's safe to do so, try and continue their running, even if you dial them back by say 10%. Or you say, stay where you are with your training at the minute. Let's let your body get used to this, and then we'll progress on again. Now, this is important, and I know I've used this, word consistency here a lot, but it is important for runners. What we'll often see is this kind of build and drop. What we want is gradual over time, and that's what will get them back and keep them back with their running. So try and keep them on track as much as you can with those secondary injuries. A further question we had was, how often do you ask your runners to run or suggest they run during the return to running process? It's a really, really good question. Now, I actually would go for, if you can, 3 runs per week if they can fit it into their schedule. That seems to be kind of the magic number a little bit for a lot of runners. If they're only running once a week, they're not getting regular stimulus for the tissue to get it used to running. We need that regular stimulus to keep things going. If they're running every day, they don't get enough recovery time in between, and that's irritating for a number of different running injuries, particularly tendons. They don't like back-to-back run days when they're still sore or symptomatic. So 3 runs a week allows you to have a day off running in between, and often on those days off running, we'll include some of their rehab. So typically for a runner, I might say let's aim for 3 short runs a week, 3 manageable rehab sessions, and have at least 1 day off everything. Typically that day is going to be prior to the longest run in your week. So you're not trying to run on tired legs. So aim for 3 times a week if you can. If that doesn't work for the patient, they can't manage that, twice a week is okay. But really 3 does seem to be a good sweet spot to work with. Sometimes they'll tolerate more. It depends, of course, where they are in their recovery process when they come to see you. Further question we got is, what about combining it with rehab? How do you do the return to running process and also include potentially strength and conditioning or rehab exercises within the weekly schedule? Now this is something to work with the runner and be realistic. Think about it yourself. If you were being asked now to run 3 times a week and fit 3 rehab sessions in, for example, would that actually fit for you? For a lot of people, it will, if those rehab sessions and runs are relatively short. But as things build up and they're running more, it becomes more and more tricky to fit it all in. So I would think about what your priority is at each stage of the rehab process. When they're not yet returning to running, or maybe they're running small amounts, so they're just starting back into running and they're doing a few minutes at a time, I think it's reasonable to have 2 or 3 rehab sessions a week, because you'll probably find they won't interfere with each other. The running and rehab won't really affect each other too much, providing you plan it in well enough. As they're starting to build up their running, or they're building towards a race, we start to reduce the number of rehab sessions to reduce fatigue. So it might be we drop from 3 sessions a week to 2, or even just to 1 session a week as a maintenance dose. If you've got someone who needs a rapid build, we talked about someone getting race ready, we might say, look, realistically, we have to prioritize your return to running here to get you ready for this event that's important for you. So let's just have 1 rehab session a week to keep your strength so you're nice and fresh during that build period. So it's looking for a little bit of flexibility or within the program, and listening to the runner and getting them to listen to their body. If they are tired and tight and achy and struggling, sometimes actually they're better off saying for a week or 2, just going to focus on recovery, maybe just have 1 rehab session within that week and keep it fairly manageable, prioritize the sleep and everything else, and keep on top of things. If they've got a big life load, they've got loads going on in their life with family stuff, work stuff, stress, sometimes it's better to say, look, let's take a little bit off your shoulders here and focus on one aspect that's most important to them at that time. So there's a little bit of priority and maximizing the recovery as much as possible. So a few thoughts there for you on some of the common barriers to return to running. Perhaps there's more that you've encountered. Please let me know in the comments and replies if you've got any questions about the return to running process. For me, I think it's probably one of the most important parts of our treatment of a runner, because ultimately for most of them, what they want is to be back running and running consistently. If we get this bit right, that's where we get really good results for runners. But the flip side, if we don't get it right, we flare things up and they can feel like they're going back to square one. So it's important to give this part of the rehab a good deal of thought. And it's why we've developed a whole collection of resources for you to help you with this process, so you can get people successfully back to running and keep them back. So our online course, Running Repairs Online, it's open for enrollment at the moment, and we have this great return to running bonus. It's just available until 3 p.m. today UK time, then that offer closes. So within this, we've got patient handouts talking about recovery and training and how to manage the symptoms. We've got that detailed return to running guide that I mentioned, and the decision tree to help you make great decisions about when to return to running and when to focus on rehab. We've got return to running programs, 6 different options for you there, from very cautious, slow, consistent options for those patients that perhaps have had some time away from running, to more rapid returns when people perhaps have minimal symptoms and feel ready to push on. Then we've got a session by session guide called the Run Through, which takes you through what to focus on in each session, when you're going to look at doing your assessments, when you might do gait analysis and retraining, when you're going to focus on progression and strength and conditioning. And finally, we've got race plans you can use for your runners to get them race ready. So we've got 5K, 10K, half marathon and full marathon, all covered in these race plans for you. So it's a really great collection of return to running resources to help you overcome these common barriers and get people back successfully to the sport that they love and back to their best. But that bonus bundle does close at 3 p.m. today. So if you want to learn more about running injuries, you want to increase your knowledge, increase your skills and confidence when treating runners, enroll on Running Repairs Online today. You'll get instant access to 18 modules and that fantastic bonus bundle. Okay, thanks very much for listening in today. As I said, any questions, just let me know in the comments and replies, and I'll speak to you again very soon. Bye for now.